In today's video, I'm going to be reviewing Ben Collins' book, How to Drive. Some say he wrote the entirety of the first draft of this book using nothing but a stick and engine oil. The only thing that we do know is that he was the Stig on Top Gear between 2003 to 2010. He runs two popular YouTube channels, which I'll link down below. He's involved, or has been involved, with motorsport with regards to taking part in racing disciplines such as NASCAR, Le Mans, Formula 3. He now also works as a stunt driver sporadically in different movies. So he's worked, done some stunt driving for Batman, the James Bond films, the Fast and Furious films. He's now recently transitioned into speaking roles and acting because he popped up in Michael Mann's Ferrari, where he played Sterling Moss, where he had a couple of words to say. I thought he did pretty good. And this is his educational offering to the motorsport world, and I'm just going to deliver my thoughts and as to whether you should pick it up or not. Spoiler, I think you should. If you are interested in driving, if you have a car, if you're thinking about getting a car, if you like motorsport, if you want to get into racing, or particularly, sim racing, this has helped me really muchly and most awesomely with my sim racing. And I just think it's a really good book. We're going to get into my thoughts and feelings, what I got out of the book, some strengths and weaknesses, and ultimately my final recommendations, which I've sort of spoiled. But let's do this. Let's just go into a brief summary about what this book is, so everybody is under no false pretenses as to what they're going to get from it. Now, I picked up this book probably fairly early into my driving career. I passed my test in something like 2008 before I went to medical school, and then I couldn't afford to drive a car because I didn't have any money, so I had to wait until I qualified, and then I got a bit of a loan, and then I bought my first car, a second-hand MX-5, which my dad still has, and it's my very favorite car. I love it very much. I love the MX-5. However, I would argue that I was driving that wrong for the first 3 years, or at least not to the best standard I could have done, just due to bad techniques that had kind of been instilled into me that I'd picked up along the way. I hadn't read an instructional book on driving since, well, the highway code or whatever my instructor taught me. And just by reading this book, it is a gateway drug into more advanced thinking with regards how to treat certain situations on the road, particularly things like your technique within the car, how a car handles with regards to its physics, what do your tires actually do to hold you onto the road. And it really got me thinking about what the car was doing whilst I was behind this, essentially several ton death machine. Overall, it's a good starting point. One thing I would point out, of course, I've read this book from front to back. I've used this multiple times over the years. It's been on my bookshelf for about 10 years. I am not affiliated with the author. All views are my own, and I purchased the book both in hard copy and ebook format. So I'll talk about the two different formats a bit later with my own hard-earned cash. So let's get into a little bit about the results that I got from this book and what I took away from it. An important thing to talk about when reading a book such as this, and particularly my own personal experience, is what results did I get from it? Now, I've already alluded to its benefit with regards to changing my driving technique from what I'd learned during my, provisional education and then advancing through into my road driving. But I do fundamentally think this book has changed my driving for the better. Just simple things such as steering wheel technique or palming a gear stick. Sounds small, but ultimately I think it keeps me safer on the road. I misshift less, and I think I control the car better. The big thing for me was, I've been dipping in and out of this book for about 10 years now, is when I got into sim racing, I went back to it. And this is where it really came into its own, because the more sort of extreme versions of what Ben talks about in this book, you can test on the track. Now, things such as the way the tyre makes contact with the ground and how that handles, how a tyre disperses water and how it handles in the wet, how the weight transfer in a car changes when you accelerate or brake, and how that affects the grip at the front and the back, and how that influences understeer and oversteer, are really well explained in this book. And I race a lot of the Skip Barber in iRacing, and for anybody that knows that car, they'll know that if you don't understand weight transfer, you are absolutely screwed. And this book made me faster, just through basic understanding, and then you're able to kind of, extrapolate that to different race cars that you're driving in the simulator, and I found it tremendously useful. And I think for anybody who's starting out in sim racing, they should read this book to understand what their simulated car is doing rather than just chucking around the track willy-nilly. Let's talk about this book's strengths. I think the main strength of this book, as I've alluded to before, is its accessibility. I think if you are fresh out of driving school, you've just got your license and you're craving a little bit more information, I think this book is an excellent starting point. I think it is written in such a fashion that it is accessible and it is not intimidating. Don't get me wrong, there may be some bits for the completely uninitiated and completely naive, where they may have to look up one or two terms, but for the most part, it is written in a way that is explained to somebody with little or no knowledge. And I read this book when I had little or no knowledge, and it definitely improved my understanding of the things I mentioned in the previous section. I also quite enjoy the little anecdotes, and I do enjoy the mix of, basic driving technique, moving on to sort of motorway driving. It goes into a bit of the history of driving and things and sorts out, which side is the right side of the road to drive on. It might surprise you. And then goes on to more advanced driving techniques and touches on racing track stuff and talks on about, his experiences on the movie set within the racing scene as well. And then goes on to talk about things like how to perform, a J-turn, a handbrake turn. And, you can't do that on the main road, and some people, might criticize that, but you can do it in a simulator, and I've done it, and it works. So this is it's a fun book, and with modern sim racing today, you can try a lot of the advanced stuff he's talking about in a safe environment where you don't have to wreck a car. Another thing I found quite surprising is that this book is quite humorous, and is full of wonderful little quotes such as these. Like the throttle, the brake pedal is super sensitive on snow. Caress and squeeze it as tenderly as though you were treading onto your own genitals, allowing the wheels enough time to spread away as you increase the pressure. A delicate process, to be sure. Another favourite quote when describing how a heavy goods vehicle overtakes another heavy goods vehicle on a motorway. It's like turtle sex, and the whole motorway comes to a standstill until it's over. Now, this won't appeal to everybody's tastes, but it definitely appealed to my schoolboy humour, and I think humour is an excellent tool in order to use within education, in order to try and convey something. It helps break up the learning environment in order to make it more accessible. I use humour in my own practice, so when I'm teaching, be it on the ward, or I'm on call, or I'm operating with the junior, perhaps, learning what can be in a fairly intense environment where things can go wrong very quickly, humor breaks it up, and I think it creates a relaxed learning environment where the learner also feels at ease and also not intimidated. Granted, this is communicated through a book, but I still do think that it's relevant. I use it, it works. I think Ben uses it here. I think it does work. I think it's a fun book, and I think it's written really, really well. Another thing is that I've already said, this is going to help you with your road driving, particularly post-driving test, with your motorway driving, how to anticipate collisions, certain emergency scenarios, and then a little bit on racing driving technique. Now, this is not a definitive guide on how to be an advanced racing driver, but what it is an excellent gateway drug into some of the more advanced books, So if you're just jumping into things, I think that, if you start jumping straight into the Skip Barber advanced driving book or Ross Bentley's Speed Secrets, these are two books I'm going to cover in a later video, I think they're quite intimidating for the uninitiated, but what Ben's book allows you to do is get all those fundamentals in a really lovely accessible package and then progress onto something a little bit more advanced. Another thing I love is how this book is laid out. It's, if you thumbing through something, particularly if you don't read a lot, the size of the font and the way diagrams are laid out are really important. I think it's laid out in a really nice fashion. I think the font is a good size. Quotes are highlighted that are important. Direct your attention to them. We call that in education signposting. So you're signposted to important things. And a big thing for me is how clear a diagram is. Now, I use diagrams a lot in work. I consult lots of optecs with regards to knee replacements, total hip replacements. And if the diagram isn't clear and you can't understand it, it's fundamentally useless. There are other driving books or resources that you can look at where things aren't represented as clear, and the diagrams that have been done in this book really explain the concepts nice and clearly, which aid the understanding, which is the whole point of a diagram. If it doesn't do that, it's completely useless, and I think this book does it really, really well. Another thing I want to talk about the strength is, if we're talking about layout, is this comes in hard copy and also ebook format. I've read both. I definitely think that, if you're going to be thumbing through this, I think it's nice to have the hard copy so those diagrams are nice and big and you can flick through the previous sections really nice and easily. But I also did in my free time, well, it's always free time, isn't it, I guess, in my own time, I did read this on an ebook as well. So I bought the Kindle version, and I think that also works really, really well. Granted, on an e-reader, obviously the diagrams aren't as big, but you can open it up on a tablet, and it looks really good as well. So I think both formats are equally good, and definitely worthy of your attention if you are choosing to get into this, if you so choose it. Yeah. It wouldn't be a complete review without talking about some weaknesses, and I do think there are a few small ones. As I have previously mentioned, this book attempts to cover a lot of topics in one book. So we go from a biographical piece about his work on like the James Bond set, the Fast and Furious sets, etc., into going into post-driving test, basic driving, into then more advanced driving techniques later on in the book. Now, there are going to be a subset of people that want one or the other of these things. You know, perhaps somebody wants more of a biography and isn't interested in the rest of the stuff, or they just want advanced driving techniques, or they've just finished their test and they just want a basic driving book. They are going to have to sift through a lot of the other stuff in order to get the information that they want from the book. Now, an option to deal with this could have been to divide this book into 3 separate parts: biography, basic driving, advanced driving, flesh them out a little bit more, and sell them as 3 separate books. Now, Ben, if you're listening,
Hello.
I would eat that up. And if you want to make a second part to this book, I would very much enjoy reading it. However, I personally enjoyed the way it was split up. I felt it kept it engaging. I enjoyed the little segues into kind of like James Bond. I'm a self-confessed James Bond nut, so I could take a whole book on stunt driving on a James Bond set. And, you know, if you want to write it, I'll read it, Ben, because I very much enjoyed that little bit insight into the workings of Eon and how, you know, the drivers work and function on the set. It's only a little part of the book, but I found that really engaging. Another bit is that I've also said it's going to take a certain amount of maturity to discern what you should and shouldn't do on the road. And let's face it, not everybody's smart, right? So, you know, some stupid people might read this and might do some stupid stuff, but I think there's going to be few and far between. But that's what sim racing's for, because you can do anything on the simulator. The last thing is, I've mentioned about it, I think it's a positive, but some might consider it as a negative. And of course, like, I read Amazon reviews and I can see what other people are thinking and stuff. And I do know some other people felt like this, and I don't necessarily agree with it, but the humorous writing in the prose, I think, might put it has, and, you know, might put a few people off, but it definitely appealed to my schoolboy humor, and I thought that was a positive. But it's something to bear in mind if you are particularly conservative and, you know, and you have some apprehensions about metaphors concerning turtle sex. Anyway, let's look at how much this book costs and where you can get it from. If you do wish to purchase a copy of this book, I will leave affiliate links to all of the versions which you can get from Amazon in either ebook or hard copy format, and also the Kobo store, which is another excellent storefront to get your ebooks from for both the United Kingdom and also the United States. I'll leave affiliate links down below in the description and the comments section, which of course help support the channel and make glorious benefit to Trauma Team Racing. So, you know, if you want to do that, I'd appreciate it. Let's wrap things up and go to the overall conclusion, and I think I've made no secret to the fact that I really, really love this book. I found tremendous value in it, and I think over time, particularly because I think, you know, 10 years ago when this first came out in 2014, sim racing was certainly not as prevalent, and in a post-COVID sim racing boomed world, sim racing is now much more prevalent, and it's, for me, taken on an almost second life where I'm able to implement a lot of the advanced stuff that this book talks about and put it into the simulator, and it's definitely improved my sim racing technique, my driving technique, and just, you know, my general awareness of other things that I may experience on things like motorway and general road driving. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I think it's valuable. Do you? Have you read it? Do you think it's valuable? You know, what do you think could have been done differently? Or what do you think it does good? Or what do you think it could have done a little bit better? If, as always, you found value in this content, please consider liking and subscribing. And as always, love you all. Take it easy. Bye for now.